Hello, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Week to you. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by a former Lord Mayor of Dublin, a former Taoiseach of Ireland, former President of the European Council, Bertie Ahern, a man who really needs no introduction, but I've just introduced him anyway. Bertie, you're very welcome today.
Thank you very much, Seán. Delighted to join you.
Thank you, Bertie. Viewers, we're going to touch today on the very important relationship between Ireland and America. We're going to touch upon the Shamrock giving ceremony in the White House. This was a tradition that was started in 1952 by our Irish ambassador to Washington, John Joseph Hearn, when he called to the White House with a box of Shamrock. Unfortunately, President Truman, who was then the US president, was not available. He was out of town and not available to receive it, but he sent Ambassador Hearn an extremely warm note, and thus began a tradition and a ceremony that has waxed and waned over the years. But I think every Irish president every American president since then has had contact with an Irish delegation on St. Patrick's Day. Not always the Taoiseach, but increasingly the Taoiseach in more recent times. I suppose. Bertie, in researching this tradition, one thing that strikes me, if we can touch upon that first, is the really excellent tradition of really high quality ambassadors that we send to Washington. They tend to be our brightest and our best and our most innovative. And I suppose that idea of John Joseph Hearn to present the box of Shamrock has set off something ever since over the last 71 years.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think. We have always been fortunate enough to have excellent ambassadors, and I suppose the big targets usually are we try to put a heavyweight into London and we try and put a heavyweight into Washington, and that tradition has continued on. They're usually people of considerable experience. We're lucky enough to have good ambassadors all over the place, we should quickly add, but I think obviously the connection with the United States is very, very important. And, throughout the year, this is the big week, of course, St. Patrick's week and so many events in America. But throughout the year, the engagement between our ambassadors, our ministers when they're there, Taoiseach on this particular occasion, always every year, is huge. And I think that the ambassadors carry the front line throughout the 52 weeks of the year. So it's very, very important.
No, I agree with you on that, Bertie. And we echo the compliments to all of our ambassadors around the world. And so there's a growing number of them now as well. I suppose the event became turbocharged, if I may use that term, under the Clinton presidency. Clinton had Cassidy forebearers who came from the Monaghan-Fermanagh border near Rosslea, and I suppose that gave him a special interest in the north. So the event seemed to become turbocharged during the Clinton presidency, and you would have seen, I think, the latter end of the Clinton presidency in terms of the White House visits and the entirety of the Bush term. And I suppose I know it's well documented now, but maybe perhaps for younger listeners and for younger viewers who weren't alive when the Good Friday Agreement was negotiated, or whose parents were very young in that period and mightn't have first-hand account of that period, how critical was Bill Clinton to bring peace to this island?
Well, I think there are probably a number of aspects. From the time was it 95 when Bill Clinton came and he did that famous address in College Green, and with John Bruton, and I think he showed that he had a real and a genuine interest. And right throughout his presidency, I think he built on the important aspect of Irish relationship. And of course, it's not that we want to draw over the coals on it, but you see the difficulty through many years, and Ronald Reagan was here and we had good relationships with all of them. But they tended to listen to the United Kingdom government, and this was the difficulty. And the State Department were particularly close to the UK system. So it was difficult, way back from Paddy Hillary going over as foreign minister in '69 to get UN support for the troubles in the north. There had been that difficulty. I think what Clinton did was change that. Clinton listened to what was being said out of Ireland, and then he developed that, and I think he realised that the whole process was going to be inclusive. So as well as bringing what would have been the key group that would go to deliver the Shamrock and exchange messages of goodwill and support, and they were always genuine. I think always genuine. But I think the big thing he did was he started bringing over more people, spreading it out into economic areas, cultural areas, across the divide of the North. And all of a sudden, I think it's everyone wanted to be there. And I was lucky to be there at a time when all of a sudden the British understood that there was a St. Patrick's Day as well, and they wanted to be there. And I kind of found that funny, but anyway, we never tried to stop them, and like they tried to do with us. So we welcomed them on as long as they wore the Shamrock. And so it was. I think that always typified to me how Bill Clinton changed it, that it became so inclusive, that secretaries of state and ministers from the British wanted to be there as well. So I think he genuinely did that. And of course, that was enormously helpful, because then he got to know the characters, he got to know the men and women of the North. And then when it came to the time we really needed him from 95 on, he knew what we were dealing with. And during not just in the Good Friday Agreement week itself 25 years ago, but I think the whole run into that and the run out of that, he was very attached to us. So I don't think we can ever thank him enough for the fact that he played such a key role. And he of course he not only sometimes people can be a bit cynical about St. Patrick's Day, but like he did the economic conference to start the North. He helped us bring in a lot of the big investments. So these are huge, and I think that nobody can ever, I think, overestimate the importance of the Irish-American relationship.
Thank you, Bertie. I suppose you've alluded there to the fact that Bill Clinton widened out the range of people, so it was not just the Irish Taoiseach and his delegation, but also leadership from Northern Ireland. Would you like to comment further maybe on how important it was that loyalist politicians and unionist politicians suddenly became part of this process, and how did that affect their thinking, and how did that help the process along?
Yeah, that's a very important point, Sean, because I remember being over, with David Irvine, the late David Irvine of the Progressive Unionist Party, who was a great guy, Billy Hutchison, and they were part of the St. Patrick's Day. They would come along to the White House. They would, they would come along to the Irish Embassy as well. In the evening. So I think all of that meant we were mixing together. It was the inclusive process that I think has kind of brought us on, not to perfection over the years, unfortunately, but certainly brought us on, and got an understanding that had never been there since 1920. I mean, the reality was we're talking about a period coming up almost the millennium, and probably since 1920 there hadn't been that kind of a inclusive process. So and that's never changed. As I say, it's not without its tensions and its imperfections, but I think the relationship now with the United States across nationalists, Republicans, Unionists, loyalists, business, cultural groups, it's now at a level that we never had in 100 years. So I think we should all feel very happy on that, and I think a lot of that. It kind of comes from Bill Clinton's period, but it also comes from Tip O'Neill's period and the relationship with Tip O'Neill and Ted Kennedy and Chris Dodd, and there were a number, and then of course the four masters, Moynihan, and so all of these things. There were slow processes, Sean. They unfortunately didn't happen overnight, but they did culminate, I think, in those years of 25 years plus and minus ago.
I'm going to touch maybe on some of those other congressional inputters into the process in a little while, Bertie. Just reverting to Clinton, I suppose his legendary charisma, legendary attention to detail, strengths that people often compliment you with also. Were there any other strengths that you found in your personal interactions with Clinton in that period that were very helpful in bringing this process about?
Well, I think the thing about him, Sean, was, as you said, he has this huge thing to detail and fairly close enough to an extraordinary photographic memory. So, I never heard him make mistakes of between unionism, loyalism, or republicanism and nationalism. And he seemed to always be able to, put people in the area that they were in, and he was always comfortable talking to. On St. Patrick's Day, just for your listeners, what used to happen, there would be delegations. Let's say there were 30 key delegations. So we'd go into one of the big halls in the White House, and each group, maybe 2 in the group, maybe 10 in the group, but they would stand in a group, and the president would go around each group and talk to each group. So everyone got their few minutes in the sun in the White House, and he would talk to them all, and he would have no notes with him. He'd have his security with him and maybe one official, but he never seemed to need that. And he would know the roles people would play, whether they were the Women's Coalition or whether they were a unionist party or a nationalist party, Republican Party, or whether they were a community group. And there were so there'd be lots of these groups. So he would cover. And there was nothing quite like that even in the island of Ireland, where you would have a range of people that would be representative of not only the diaspora, but so many organizations, and his capacity to engage and listen to them, and of course everyone they'd know they only had a few minutes, and they would have their message, and they would have their statement to make, and he did this all his years, and it was continued afterwards, in fairness, by presidents, but he initiated that.
As I want to zone in on the afterwards now, that presidential election of 2000, when Bill Clinton hoped to hand over to Al Gore, was extremely divisive, highly contested, lots of court cases, not unlike the situation we faced a number of years ago. I suppose, was there apprehension? Irish people tend to gravitate towards the Democrats, here at home at least. Was there apprehension then when there was that handover from Clinton to Bush, in terms of the impact that might have on the types of meetings you're talking about and the types of goodwill you're talking about?
There was, Sean, yeah, because we didn't know whether that engagement, that open house position would remain. Now, I have to say it wasn't quite as big or as extensive because of the point you've made, that the Irish community tended to be very close to the Democrats, not exclusively, and it's not maybe as it would have been back in the Kennedy years now, but it still was a closeness. So we were worried about that. We knew it wouldn't be as big, or but he did continue to give most of the day. Him and his wife greeted me. You had the handover to Shamrock. You then got a meeting with the president, with several of his key Secretary of States, and that meeting was always a political meeting where you got the insight of where we were and where he was. And I remember, of course, him briefing us where his mind was on the Iraqi war, which wasn't really what we wanted to hear, but anyway, but generally on issues of Ireland. And it was our platform to raise issues that might be affecting Irish trade, Irish multinationals, maybe environmental issues. So and you got all the key people there. So that was really a great opportunity for us. So he continued all that. He continued the reception, and then going down to Capitol Hill for the Speaker's lunch. He continued doing that again, which is a great occasion, because again, for your listeners, Sean, that brings together a huge amount of the Friends of Ireland on Capitol Hill. those who are in that group and those who are not. And the president says a few words, the Taoiseach says a few words, and it's obviously the speaker, Nancy Pelosi, for a number of years has been doing that. That'll be different this year. Ms. McCarthy will be doing that. So all of these things he continued on. Maybe the late night parties didn't go on quite as long, Sean, but
I can imagine. I think he famously went to bed at 9 or 10 p.m.
Yeah, so it wasn't quite as mad as the Clinton years, but yeah. I think all the business all the important bits were done.
Did he defy your expectations in any way, Bertie? I always feel he was kind of greatly, to use a phrase he coined, misunderestimated. Did he defy your expectations, or was there anything about the public image that didn't shine with the private man you met?
Yeah, there was no doubt about that. He was very courteous. He was very, very nice, and he was very, very helpful. It was an amazing thing during all of the years when I was there, and was over many, many years. But even during the year, we wouldn't deny the President of America too many times during the year, but there were crucial times then when it was important that we spoke directly to him, or that he wanted to speak directly to me or to those who followed me. And we could get access to the President of the United States on those rare occasions that we needed them, probably within the day. And it was extraordinary that we could get that access. And I remember President Bush, there were a few contentious issues about who should be invited, and when things got a bit difficult. And he actually rang himself, to double check on advice he got from the State Department, because he didn't want to be unhelpful to the process. That was, people would be wondering what was that about, but that was about the period, Sean, where the Robert McCartney murder had taken place in the north, and you remember his sisters went over, and you remember that year there was a fair bit of tensions around that. But the State Department's view was kind of not to ask Sinn Féin at all that year, but we were of the view that would have been a mistake, that we needed to keep the inclusive nature of the process. And he rang himself to check that, and that was extraordinary that he would do that. So no, from in a sentence, Sean, he continued to be very much engaged, to be helpful. He wanted the peace process in Northern Ireland to be bipartisan, and through his 8 years, he stuck faithfully to that and was always extremely helpful to us.
Bertie, you've referred there to the trip to Capitol Hill, and you've referred to the importance of congressional players in the Irish-American relationship. I think that the Capitol Hill lunch, Speaker's lunch on St. Patrick's Day, is one of only 3 occasions when the President goes to Capitol Hill. The other is his inauguration, and the other then is the State of the Union address, the annual State of the Union address. I'd just be interested in your reflections, please, on some of those congressional leaders. I suppose I think first of Ted Kennedy, a great lion of the Senate, who I suppose when his presidential ambitions dropped, devoted himself fully to his Senate career, and also devoted himself greatly to improving the lot of this island. I'd be interested in your personal remembrances of him, please.
Yeah, well, Ted Kennedy was a giant of the Senate. Arguably, the fact that he wasn't president, he became far more powerful politician in America. Like, he put more legislation on the statute book, social, educational, health, environmental legislation. He always had the best staffers. He was amazingly powerful. He had friends across the floor. He could deliver, most significant things. And he never stopped having an enormous interest in Ireland. You could see that in his office, the photographs in his office. And he was a giant of going to those lunches on St. Patrick's Day, meeting the Taoiseach afterwards, meeting Irish delegations afterwards. Going to the Ireland Funds function. So, he was and Chris Dodd, who was his great friend of Connemara fame, and Chris had a place in Connemara for generations.
And senator from Connecticut.
Yeah, and massively influential. Like, they were heavyweights. They were not Irish heavyweights. They were heavyweights, full stop, in the Senate. And the fact that we had those guys on our team, and afterwards, we had all of the Richie Neal, who is still there, and we had Congressman Walsh, and we were so lucky that we had them. And we have to keep working on that. We probably won't have time today, Sean, but I think it's another interesting thing that I think it's important that we build a new generation of those contacts, because unfortunately through retirements and deaths we've lost real heavyweights, and I think we have to put in the effort to replace those people as best you can.
No, I agree fully with you on that point, Bertie. Yes, was another great strength of the Irish American network is that we have people everywhere, not just in these key roles, but as advisors and maybe election workers for these people, etc. We have people in business in Irish America who lent their weight greatly to the cause of peace on this island. Is there anyone maybe in that Irish American community who's not a household name here in Ireland, or who doesn't feature heavily in the history books, that is worth acknowledging or worth mentioning, or that was very helpful to you?
Well, I think there are a huge amount of them. I better not start taking individual names, you'd be definitely in trouble. But I can tell you there are people within the White House, and many of them who have been in their roles for maybe 30 years, who understand fully. They're from Ireland, they were Irish born, family back in Ireland. And I have to say, Sean, there were times over the years when you wanted to make a contact and you wanted to get to some of the Senate leaders or some of the Congress leaders that I know Irish embassy staff would feed the story into those people, because they were remarkably successful. Mainly women, by the way, who were, there were people who came up through the secretary's role and then became advisors and then became really helpful people. But I think there were also people that were very senior in the system that may not have been Irish. Nancy Soderberg, who was a great friend of John Hume and very senior in the State Department. She used to come to Derry and Donegal, and really key people. And she was somebody that was at the top of the State Department, which was really important. I think she went on to be ambassador in different countries afterwards.
Okay, Bertie, our time is limited, and there's just one or two things I want to cover with you. I suppose a lot of the narrative around the St. Patrick's Day visits, not only to Washington, but to other key cities in America and indeed around the world, focuses on foreign investment into this country. But there's a lot of Irish companies doing great work in America, and a lot of Irish jobs on this island depend on Irish companies doing well in America. So do you want to comment on that and the fact that it's no longer a one-way relationship? It's very much a relationship.
That's very important point, Sean, because we now are lucky enough that we have across the information communication technology companies and the pharmaceutical companies, but we also have huge food companies. We've Glendimplex, and we major investment in the United States. We've the Kerry Group, of course, in the food end. Now you have a big whiskey market, which is big. But you've many Irish now multinationals have considerable investments, and the figures are very impressive. So I don't have the latest ones, but I know like it used to be about 55-45. So the Irish employment in America for Irish multinationals is vast. Most people don't really know or appreciate that. So I think it is a very important point. And weeks like this, I suppose we should quickly add, Sean, that weeks like this give incredible access to Irish companies. The reason for the ministerial visits over the years is that those delegations get into companies, they get inside to meet CEOs and finance guys. There's all the receptions and functions that are held around St. Patrick's Week. And those contacts then are developed and built on. And that's why over the last, 30, 40 years that we've built up such powerful foreign direct investments on the island of Ireland, and it is crucial. It is crucial for us, and I think this year there's a big chance for helping out Northern Ireland to hopefully, if things work out well, that they'll also be able to play a big role. They'll be in the single market, and so I'm sure that will be on the agenda of every minister in every part of the States.
Thank you, Bertie, and again, that's an important message to get across to our listeners. Very final question, if I may. Should Joe Biden run again? Is he too old, or should he run again?
I always find that in the United States, an enormous country with, an enormous politician, an enormous political base, that they seem to run short almost on people that are there for the presidency. And, you have Trump knocking at the door again. I don't want to see him back, to be honest. Joe Biden is pushing on. There's no doubt about that. But I don't see the people that are going to jump into his shoes.
I agree. Yeah.
So it looks as the Republicans, Sean, seem to be coming up with a fair few. Haley is an impressive lady. I was very impressed with her when she was on the embassy, and of course DeSantis, a huge base in California. So the Republicans seem to be coming up with strong names. So it's going to be all to play for, and of course we look forward to Joe coming to Ireland somewhere later on this year, hopefully, and we if he's going to run again, we'll wish him well. But it's a tough job to be president of the United States. I mean, it is the executive powers, and you need to be in the whole of your health. And I suppose Joe ultimately has to make a decision. Will he definitely run? But as of now, as this St. Patrick's Day, it looks as if he will.
Yep. Thank you, Bertie, for that analysis across the range of topics we've discussed. We're a little bit over time. I apologize. Final opportunity, Bertie. I know I'm not the only former politician trying to do interviews. You have also ventured into the podcast space. Would you like to talk about that very briefly before we wrap up?
For a good few years now, we had been talking about, doing a podcast with all of the people who'd been involved in Good Friday, or as many of them as we possibly could. So we've managed to do this, I think, really good podcast with News Talk, and it's 9 programs of nearly an hour each, and it has, Tony Blair and Bill Clinton and George Mitchell and all the political leaders, and it's not really, it's me just asking the questions, but it's their overview of what happened then and what's happened since. So I think and of course, Good Friday Games on the curriculum now in the education system. So I think people who have been interested in, and particularly younger people, with an interest in what happened, they will get the perspective of all sides on what happened on this period 25 years ago.
Bertie Ahern, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time, and wish you a happy St. Patrick's Day, and wish you well in the coming weeks as you mark and commemorate the anniversary of the Good Friday Games.
Thank you, Sean, and wish you every success, and have a great St. Patrick's week.